The city swallowed me whole the moment I stepped off the bus. Its streets were alive with a hum of energy I'd never felt before. Cars whizzing by, people moving with purpose, and the towering buildings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. I clutched my small suitcase tighter, the weight of my dreams suddenly heavier than I'd imagined. I had come to make something of myself. I'd left behind the endless, dusty roads of my hometown and the quiet judgment of people who'd never dared to leave. I was going to college, and nothing was going to stop me, except failure. I hadn't seen it coming. I'd spent months preparing, but when I sat down for the entrance exams, my mind went blank. Each question felt like a foreign language, and I watched in horror as the clock ticked mercilessly forward. The moment they handed me back the paper with the big red fail stamped across it, my heart sank. My future, the one I had been so sure of, shattered right in front of me. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. So I wandered aimlessly until I found a bench outside the college, and that's where I crumbled. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing as waves of disappointment crashed over me. How could I return home now? I'd promised everyone I would make it. I had nothing to show for all the hope I'd built up, Black, and the thought of going back defeated made my chest tighten. "Hey, you all right?" I hadn't heard him approach, but suddenly there was a man standing over me, his voice smooth and filled with unexpected warmth. I looked up, blinking through my tears, and met the piercing green eyes of a stranger. He wasn't from this world I had just failed to enter. No, he seemed to float above it, his presence both out of reach and irresistibly magnetic. His clothes were casual but expensive, his dark hair styled just right without trying too hard. "No, I'm not all right," I blurted, feeling embarrassed by the tears streaking my face, but too defeated to care. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, but not so close that it felt invasive. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, his tone light, as if we were just old friends catching up. "There's nothing to talk about. I failed," I said, shaking my head. "I just failed." He smiled, not the kind of smile that mocked, but one that understood. "I've been there. Trust me, failure isn't as final as it feels in the moment." I sniffled, glancing sideways at him. "Oh yeah? And how would you know?" He shrugged, leaning back on the bench as if this were the most casual conversation in the world. "Because I failed too. Multiple times. At everything." This man, with his cool demeanor and effortless charm, seemed so far from failure. I narrowed my eyes, skeptical. "Everything?" "Everything that mattered," he replied, his eyes locking on mine with a seriousness that made my breath catch for a second. "But look at me now, graduated top of my class from this very school." He gestured to the imposing college building behind us, as if it were his second home. I laughed despite myself. "Top of your class, huh?" "Absolutely. And let me tell you, sitting here crying about it isn't going to change a thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. "Who carries a handkerchief anymore?" He pressed it into my hand, his fingers brushing mine, sending a small electric charge up my arm. "Wipe your eyes. You've got better things to do than sit around crying." I hesitated, but then took the handkerchief and dabbed at my face. The silk fabric was absurdly soft, and for a moment, I felt like I was holding something precious, like he had handed me a small piece of his world. "I'm Alex, by the way," he said, offering his hand like we were meeting for the first time at some fancy event, not while I sat there broken on a college bench. I took his hand, feeling the confidence in his grip. "Emily," I replied, my voice steadier now. "Emily," he repeated, as if testing how it felt to say my name. "So what's the plan?" "The plan?" I frowned, not following. "Yeah. What's next? Are you going to let one failure stop you, or are you going to try again? Because I can tell you, if I'd given up the first time I failed, I wouldn't be sitting here with you." His words were like a spark, igniting something inside me that I thought had been extinguished by my disappointment. "I don't know," I admitted. "I mean, I came here to study. I was going to do something with my life. But now you're in the city, and that's half the battle won," Alex said, cutting me off, his tone suddenly sharp with urgency. "Look, this place, this city, will eat you alive if you let it. But it can also give you everything you want if you're willing to fight for it. You don't need to go running back home with your tail between your legs. You stay, you work, and you try again. Next year, you'll get into this school, or somewhere better, and you'll remember this moment as the start of everything." His words hit me like a challenge, and suddenly, the idea of returning home felt suffocating. Staying, fighting, trying again. Those things seemed like the only option. "But I don't know if anyone will hire me," I said, thinking of the countless rejections I'd face without a college degree. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're in the city now, Emily. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know, and you know me." There was something intoxicating in the way he said it, as if he were offering me a secret passageway into a world I didn't know existed. "And what does knowing you get me?" I asked, half joking, but also curious about how far he could take me. He flashed a smile, his green eyes gleaming with mischief. "Connections. And trust me, in this city, connections are everything." That night, I didn't return to my tiny apartment in the outskirts of the city. Alex insisted on taking me to a restaurant I could never afford on my meager savings. We laughed over expensive food and wine, the sting of my failure slowly fading into the background as I fell deeper into the spell he wove with his words. By the end of the night, I wasn't just Emily, the girl who had failed her exams. I was someone with potential, with possibilities I hadn't seen before. And Alex, with his effortless charm and his ability to make me feel like the center of the universe, became the first chapter in the story of my new life. As we left the restaurant, the cool night air brushing against my skin, he leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. "Don't give up, Emily," he whispered, his voice low and intimate. "Your life is just getting started." And as I looked up at the stars, high above the city skyline, I believed him. What I didn't know then was that everything Alex offered would come with a price. After that first night with Alex, my life became a whirlwind of emotions, late-night dinners and whispered promises. He was intoxicating, pulling me into his world with such ease that I barely noticed how deep I'd already fallen. We became inseparable, or at least I thought we had. He had this way of making every moment with him feel like it was a secret, a treasure only we shared. When we were together, it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. But as time passed, the cracks in that perfect picture began to show. Alex was busy, always busy. He moved through life with a carefree attitude, never staying in one place for too long. Some days he would vanish for hours, sometimes for the entire night, with vague explanations about meetings or work. And yet, every time he returned, he brought me back under his spell, with that same charming smile and those hypnotic green eyes. He was addictive, like a drug I couldn't quit. One evening, after he'd been gone all day, he showed up at my apartment with a bottle of champagne and a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He seemed restless. But there was excitement too, an energy that crackled in the air between us. "You're dressed too casually for what I have planned," he said as he leaned in, kissing my cheek before sweeping past me and into the living room. His eyes flicked over the clutter of my small apartment, the remnants of takeout containers and half-finished novels. "Go put on something nice." I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms. "Where are we going this time? Another one of your meetings?" I asked, the sarcasm slipping out before I could stop myself. He smirked, pouring 2 glasses of champagne and handing one to me. "You'll see," was all he said, his eyes dancing with that familiar mischief. I wanted to resist, to demand answers, but the pull of his charm was stronger. I found myself changing into a sleek black dress, the kind that made me feel invincible. When I emerged, Alex's gaze lingered on me longer than usual, and for a moment, I saw something deeper in his eyes. Something dangerous, maybe even calculating. But before I could question it, he grabbed my hand and led me out the door. The restaurant was breathtaking, one of those places where the lights were dim, the music soft, and the air filled with the scent of expensive food. I knew the kind of people who dined here, the untouchables, the elite, the ones who looked down on girls like me from towns like mine. I felt out of place, but Alex, with his effortless charm, made me feel like I belonged. Dinner was exquisite, each course more luxurious than the last. But my mind kept drifting back to the question that had been nagging me for weeks. What was I really to Alex? A passing fling? A distraction from his real life? Or something more? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. Halfway through dessert, Alex leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my heart race. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than usual, There's something I've been meaning to ask you. My pulse quickened. I set down my fork, my eyes searching his for any sign of what was coming. What is it? He took a deep breath as if bracing himself. I think it's time we take this to the next level. My stomach flipped, but I didn't dare show the swirl of emotion surging through me. The next level? I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. His smile was slow, deliberate, as if he were savoring my reaction. Marry me, Emily. I froze. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard him correctly. Marriage? The word echoed in my head like a bell, loud and shocking. I stared at him, my mouth opening, but no words coming out. He chuckled, leaning forward and taking my hand. Come on, don't look so surprised. You know I care about you. We've been good together, haven't we? Good together? That's how he saw us. Something casual, something that could be defined so simply. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Was this a real proposal? Or was it just another move in the game that Alex always seemed to be playing? And why now? Why so suddenly, without any prelude or real romance behind it? I started, but he cut me off. Look, I know I'm not exactly a conventional guy, he said, flashing that same disarming smile, but I'm serious. Let's do it. Tomorrow we can file the papers. Easy. Easy. As if it were just that simple. As if marriage was something we could slide into like a pair of designer shoes. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind screaming at me to ask him why. Why now? Why me? But then I looked into his eyes, those piercing green eyes that always seemed to know exactly how to manipulate me, and I felt the pull again. The world with Alex was exciting, unpredictable, and dangerous in a way that made my blood hum with energy. The thought of losing him, of letting go of the life I thought I could have with him, was terrifying. I nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. Okay, I whispered. He grinned, his face lighting up like a child who had just won a game. Great, he said, lifting his champagne glass. To us then. The next day, true to his word, Alex took me to City Hall. The proposal wasn't romantic, and the wedding wasn't much more than a few signatures on a piece of paper. But there I was, Emily from a small town, now married to Alex, a man I barely understood but couldn't seem to let go of. And just like that, I was part of his world. Or so I thought. The reality of married life with Alex was different than I had imagined. We moved into a high-rise apartment his parents had gifted us as a wedding present. It was sleek, modern, and completely impersonal. Alex treated it like a crash pad, somewhere to sleep, occasionally eat, but never truly live. Most nights, he was gone, his vague excuses of work or networking growing more and more frequent. I spent those nights alone, watching the city lights blink outside our window, wondering what kind of life I had signed up for. The man I had fallen for, the charming, witty Alex, was slipping away, replaced by someone distant, someone cold. And then there was Mike. Alex's cousin, Mike, was the polar opposite of Alex, ordinary, grounded, and far too transparent for his own good. While Alex was all mystery and allure, Mike wore his heart on his sleeve, and it didn't take long for me to notice the way he looked at me. I saw it at every family dinner, at every gathering. The way his gaze lingered a little too long, the way he'd laughed too hard at my jokes, and the way his face softened every time I spoke to him. At first, I brushed it off. I had married Alex, not Mike. But as the months wore on and Alex grew more distant, Mike's attention became harder to ignore. He was always there, at family events, offering me a drink, a joke, a smile. And sometimes I caught myself enjoying it, the way his eyes followed me like I was the only person in the room. But there was something dangerous about that attention. Something that made my pulse quicken, not with excitement, but with a warning. I was Alex's wife now. And whatever Mike felt, whatever fleeting affection I might have felt in return, was a line I couldn't cross. At least not yet. Life with Alex was never what I had imagined marriage to be. There were no shared mornings over coffee, no late-night conversations where we spilled our hearts out to one another. Instead, there were endless nights of waiting, alone in our sleek, impersonal apartment, wondering when he would return. He had always been a mystery, and now, even as his wife, he remained an enigma. I had never really known who Alex was. I was realizing that now. At first, I convinced myself it was just the honeymoon period fading, that all marriages settled into something more routine. But this was something else entirely. Our life wasn't settling. It was crumbling. Alex had this ability to make me feel like the center of the universe when he was around, but those moments became rare. He started disappearing for longer stretches, sometimes without explanation, sometimes with half-hearted excuses that never quite added up. He was always at work or meeting with a client. And yet, whenever I asked him about the details, his answers were vague, always just out of reach, like everything else about him. It wasn't that Alex was cruel or even unkind. No, that would have been easier to handle. What made it unbearable was his indifference. He floated in and out of my life, barely noticing the time passing, the distance growing between us. And with every passing day, I felt more like a shadow in his life than a partner. There were nights when he didn't come home at all, leaving me alone with nothing but the empty hum of the city outside our apartment windows. On those nights, I'd sit on the edge of our bed, staring at my reflection in the floor-length mirror. I'd wonder if I'd made a mistake, if I had been so blinded by the excitement of being with someone like Alex that I hadn't seen the truth about him. But the truth was slippery, always just beyond my grasp. One evening, after another day of silence from Alex, I found myself rifling through the drawer of his desk. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Answers, maybe. A reason why my husband was becoming more of a ghost than a man. What I found, however, was much worse. Tucked away between some papers, I found a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it, expecting to find something meaningful, something that would explain everything. Maybe a gift he had forgotten to give me, something romantic that would make all my doubts disappear. But inside wasn't a ring or necklace, no token of affection. Instead, there was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with a name that wasn't mine. To Jessica, with love, it read, the letters curling elegantly on the polished metal. My blood ran cold. Jessica? Who the hell was Jessica? I sat down hard in the chair, my mind spinning. The bracelet was too intimate, too personal to be for a casual friend or business associate. The woman's name burned in my mind, sparking a fire of jealousy and anger that I hadn't known I was capable of. Suddenly, the late nights, the vague excuses, the missed dinners, they all clicked into place with brutal clarity. I slammed the drawer shut, my hands trembling, and tried to breathe, but the air felt thick and suffocating. My head spun with possibilities, none of them good. There had always been something about Alex that felt too smooth, too practiced, but I had ignored it, blinded by my desire to believe in the fantasy he had spun for me. Now, it seemed that fantasy was unraveling before my eyes. That night, Alex came home late again, the smell of alcohol clinging to him like a cloud. I watched him as he stumbled through the door, his eyes glazed, but still managing to flash me that easy, charming smile. "You're still up?" he asked, shrugging off his coat and tossing it over the back of a chair, as if nothing were wrong, as if I hadn't just uncovered the truth about him. I stood there, gripping the back of the couch so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Who's Jessica?" The words fell into the silence like a bomb, and for a split second, I saw the surprise flicker across his face before he masked it with that same disarming grin. He was good, too good, but I wasn't buying it this time. "Jessica?" he repeated, feigning confusion as he loosened his tie. "I don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer, holding up the bracelet. "Don't lie to me, Alex. I found this in your drawer. To Jessica, with love." His eyes darted to the bracelet, and for the briefest moment, his facade slipped. But then he laughed, a low, dismissive chuckle that made my skin crawl. "Emily, come on. It's nothing. Just a gift I bought for an old friend. But I never got around to giving it to her. Don't overthink it." I stared at him, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "An old friend? You expect me to believe that?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Alex?" "What am I supposed to think? You're never home. You disappear without telling me where you're going. And now I find this." My voice cracked with the weight of everything I had been holding in for months. He stepped toward me, his expression softening, and for a second, I hated myself for wanting to believe him. "Emily," he said quietly, reaching out to take my hand. "I love you. You're my wife. You need to trust me." I pulled my hand away, my chest heaving. "Trust you? How can I trust you when you're keeping secrets?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, his expression hardening. "Look, if you're going to start accusing me of things, I don't have time for this right now. I'm tired, and I don't want to argue. Just like that, he shut me down. The walls went up, and the conversation was over. I stood there, trembling with frustration and betrayal, as Alex brushed past me, heading into the bedroom without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the living room, still clutching the bracelet in my hand. For hours, I sat there, the weight of the bracelet heavy in my palm, my mind racing with questions I knew Alex would never answer. The illusion of our love, of our life together was crumbling, and I didn't know how to stop it. Maybe I never could. Maybe I had been living in a fantasy all along. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the realization that, despite everything, I still loved him. I still wanted him to be the man I had fallen for. And that scared me more than anything. As dawn crept in through the windows, casting a pale light over the apartment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Alex control my life, my emotions. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. But there was one thing I knew for sure. If Alex had secrets, then so could I. The next morning, I met Mike for coffee. He was there for me in a way Alex never had been, listening, comforting, making me feel seen. And for the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than waiting for a man who had already slipped through my fingers. Mike was always in the background, like a quiet, steady pulse. He was there at every family event, every gathering, always watching, always waiting. I had seen the way his eyes lingered on me from the beginning, but I had dismissed it. Back then, I was blinded by my infatuation with Alex. To me, Mike was just Alex's cousin, the nice, ordinary guy who made polite conversation, told awkward jokes, and didn't seem to fit in with the polished, sophisticated circles Alex and his family moved in. But after the discovery of the bracelet for Jessica, Mike's presence began to feel different. When Alex left for his long business trips or nights out, Mike would check in. Sometimes it was a simple text. "How are you doing?" Other times, he'd call and suggest we grab a coffee or a quick lunch. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was just being kind, a good friend, maybe even a little protective of me, given how absent Alex had become. But kindness can be deceptive. The day after my confrontation with Alex, I agreed to meet Mike for coffee. I needed to get out of the apartment, to escape the suffocating walls that seemed to hold all of Alex's lies. When I walked into the cafe, Mike was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. His eyes lit up the moment he saw me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to really see him. Mike wasn't like Alex. He wasn't polished or slick. He didn't have Alex's sharp jawline or piercing green eyes that could freeze or melt you with just one look. No, Mike was softer. His dark hair always slightly tousled, his smile warm and genuine. There was no pretense with him, no games. And after months of feeling like I was constantly spinning in Alex's web, that honesty felt like a lifeline. "Hey, you look, well, tired." Mike said as I sat down, his eyes scanning my face with concern. "Thanks," I replied with a weak smile, taking a sip of the coffee he had already ordered for me. "That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." He chuckled, but there was a sadness in his eyes, a look that said he knew more than I had ever let on. "Rough night?" I hesitated. I hadn't planned on telling him anything. This was supposed to be a break from the mess that was my marriage, but the words tumbled out before I could stop them. "I found a bracelet for someone named Jessica." Mike's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't ask stupid questions. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, and said, "I'm sorry, Emily. You don't deserve that." Something about the way he said my name, the way his voice dipped low with genuine sympathy, made the tears that I had been holding back for hours rise up again. I tried to blink them away, but one slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I hated myself for crying, for feeling so weak, but Mike didn't seem to judge me. Instead, he reached across the table and gently wiped the tear away with his thumb, his touch lingering a second too long. "Why are you doing this, Mike?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why do you care?" His gaze softened, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that scared me, something deeper, something dangerous. "Because I see you, Emily," he said quietly. "I see what he's doing to you, and it kills me. You deserve better." His words were like a balm, soothing the ache that had settled deep inside me. I hadn't realized how desperate I was for someone to notice, to care. But as comforting as Mike's attention was, it also frightened me. I wasn't naive. I knew where this could lead. I pulled back, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment, the heat between us. "I can't, Mike," I said, shaking my head. "I'm married. I'm still trying to figure things out with Alex." Mike nodded, but there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "I get it. But don't forget what you deserve, Emily. Don't let him make you feel small. You're stronger than that." We finished our coffee in silence, the tension between us crackling like electricity. I told myself that this was just a moment, that I could control it, that nothing would happen. But deep down, I knew I had already crossed a line, even if it was just in my heart. As the weeks passed, Mike's presence became a constant comfort. He texted me more often, found reasons to stop by the apartment when he knew Alex wasn't home. He never pushed, never crossed any obvious lines, but the way he looked at me told me everything I needed to know. He was waiting, biding his time. Then one night, everything changed. It was late, and Alex still hadn't come home. I had stopped bothering to call him, stopped asking where he was. The silence between us had grown too thick to break. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the city lights through the window when my phone buzzed. "Mike? You okay?" Without thinking, I texted him back, "No." 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mike standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a soft smile on his face. "I thought you could use some company," he said, stepping inside before I could protest. I should have stopped him. I should have told him to leave. But the truth was, I didn't want to be alone anymore. And I didn't want to keep pretending that I didn't enjoy the way Mike looked at me, the way he made me feel seen. We sat on the couch, sharing the wine in silence at first. But as the bottle emptied, the conversation flowed easier, the tension melting away. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. I hadn't realized how much I had missed the simple joy of feeling happy. Then, as the night wore on, something shifted. I felt Mike's hand graze mine, lingering just a little longer than it should have. My pulse quickened, and I turned to look at him. His eyes were darker now, filled with something I had only glimpsed before. "Mike," I whispered, but before I could say anything else, his lips were on mine. For a moment, I froze, every nerve in my body on fire. This was wrong, so wrong, but it felt so right. His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was giving me time to pull away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, the weight of all my frustrations, my loneliness, pouring into that kiss. It was intoxicating, his hands on my skin, the taste of wine on his lips, the warmth of his body pressing against mine. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, the reality of what had just happened crashing down around us. Mike's eyes searched mine, his expression torn between desire and guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw. "I couldn't help it." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I," he admitted, his hand still resting on my thigh. "But I know this, Emily. I've cared about you for a long time, longer than you probably realize." My chest tightened at his words, the confession hanging in the air between us. This was the moment where everything could change, where I could give in to what was happening between us, or walk away. But the truth was, I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to feel wanted. I wanted to feel alive. Before I could stop myself, I kissed him again, harder this time, pulling him closer, letting myself drown in the moment. And in that moment, Alex didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. When the night ended and Mike finally left, the guilt settled in. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where Alex should have been. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and yet a part of me didn't regret it, because for the first time in months, I had felt something real. But real things come with consequences, and I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after my night with Mike, I woke up feeling disoriented, the weight of guilt pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. The air in the apartment felt different, thicker, charged with the knowledge that I had crossed a line, that I had done something I couldn't take back. My mind raced with memories of his touch, his kiss, the way his hands had felt on my skin. It had been intoxicating, dangerous, and in the brief moments of passion, it had felt like an escape from everything I had been drowning in. But now, in the cold light of morning, all I could think about was Alex. Alex was still absent, his side of the bed, untouched. He had been out all night again, probably with Jessica or whoever else he was seeing behind my back. The bitter irony of it all was hard to swallow. We had both betrayed each other, but for some reason, my betrayal felt heavier, darker. Days passed, and I threw myself into trying to act like nothing had happened. I avoided Mike, telling myself that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, nothing more. I went through the motions, burying the guilt, pretending my marriage wasn't falling apart while the pieces of my life crumbled around me. But the universe has a cruel way of reminding you that some things can't be buried. A few weeks later, I started feeling sick. It was subtle at first. Just a wave of nausea here, a dizzy spell there. I chalked it up to stress. After all, with everything that had been happening with Alex, my nerves were shot. But then I missed my period, and a cold, sinking realization began to creep in. No, it couldn't be. I bought the pregnancy test on a whim, thinking I was being paranoid. But standing in the bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines that had appeared on the test, I felt my entire world tilt. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself, as the reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. I was pregnant. My heart raced, my thoughts spinning out of control. It could be Alex's, I told myself, trying to calm the rising panic. It could be his, but it could just as easily be Mike's. My stomach churned at the thought, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. I couldn't be sure. I had no idea whose child I was carrying. I sank to the floor, the cold tile pressing against my legs as I stared at the test, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. A baby. This was supposed to be a joyous moment, a celebration of life. But all I felt was fear, uncertainty, and the creeping sense that this child, this unexpected life, could unravel everything. I thought of telling Alex. Maybe this would bring us back together. Maybe a child could fix the distance between us, reignite whatever had been lost. But the cynical part of me knew that was a lie. Alex didn't care. He was too wrapped up in his secret life, too detached to even notice what was happening in mine. And then there was Mike. I hadn't spoken to him since that night. I had avoided his calls, his texts, hoping the distance would help me forget what had happened. But now I had to face the possibility that the man who had been so gentle, so kind, could be the father of my child. The thought terrified me. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself forever. So I called Alex. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice casual, as if nothing had changed. "Hey, what's up?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight with the weight of what I was about to say. "We need to talk," I whispered, my voice trembling, despite my best efforts to sound calm. Alex hesitated. "About what?" "I'm pregnant." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind that makes your heart pound in your chest as you wait for a reaction. Finally, Alex spoke, but his voice lacked the excitement or fear I had expected. "Okay," he said, like I had just told him the weather forecast. "So, what now?" What now? I felt my pulse quicken. This was his reaction? A part of me had hoped he would show some kind of emotion, some sign that this news meant something to him. But no, it was like I had told him we were out of milk. I thought you'd be happy," I stammered, grasping at straws. "Or at least something." Alex sighed. "I'm not upset, Emily, but I'm not jumping for joy either. I've got a lot going on right now, and I just can't deal with this right now." My hands tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning white. "You can't deal with this? I'm your wife, Alex. This is your child." He sighed again, the sound full of frustration. "Is it? I mean, we haven't exactly been close." I froze, my heart stopping for a moment. He knew, or at least he suspected. He didn't come out and say it, but the implication was clear. He had sensed the distance between us, the unspoken divide that had grown since the night with Mike. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too thick, my hands shaking as I held the phone. Alex didn't push it. He didn't ask any questions, didn't demand answers. Instead, he muttered something about needing time to think and hung up. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Days turned into weeks, and Alex barely spoke to me. He came and went as usual, his presence nothing more than a ghost in the apartment we shared. The distance between us grew wider, the silence heavier, and I knew that whatever we had once been was over. The pregnancy didn't bring us closer. It pushed us further apart. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was yet to come. Mike found out. I had tried to keep it from him, tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But one afternoon, he showed up at my door, his eyes filled with concern. He had heard the whispers, the rumors. He had pieced together enough to come to his own conclusion. "Emily," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "Is it true?" I couldn't lie. Not to him. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as I avoided his gaze. Mike's breath hitched, and for a moment he just stood there, processing the news. Then he took a step closer, his voice thick with emotion. Is it mine?" My throat tightened, and I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know, Mike." The pain in his eyes was palpable, like a punch to the gut. He ran a hand through his hair, his face twisted in anguish. "Emily, if this is my child, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of both of you. You don't have to do this alone." I stared at him, my chest tightening with a mix of relief and fear. His offer was sincere, I could see that. Mike had always cared for me, always been there when Alex wasn't. But I wasn't ready to accept his help. I wasn't ready to accept the reality of what had happened between us. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who the father is. I don't know what I want." Mike's face softened, and he reached out, gently taking my hand in his. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. I won't let you go through this alone." His words were a balm to the storm raging inside me. But they also scared me, because deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something far more complicated than I had ever anticipated. I wasn't just carrying a child. I was carrying the weight of two men's lives, two men's futures. And no matter what I did, someone would get hurt. The weight of my choices pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket, heavy and impossible to shake off. Every breath I took was filled with the uncertainty of what the future held. The pregnancy had become the center of my life, but it was no longer just about me. It was about the two men orbiting my world like opposing forces, pulling me in different directions. Alex's reaction, or lack thereof, had shaken me to my core. I had hoped, deep down, that the news of the baby would somehow reignite a spark between us, that he'd remember the love we once shared. But Alex had become a ghost in my life, his presence barely noticeable except for the occasional reminder of his physical absence. He was out of town more frequently now, always with a vague excuse, and the distance between us had become a yawning chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. Meanwhile, Mike had become a constant. He was there every day, checking in on me, offering to help with groceries, or just sitting with me in silence when the weight of it all became too much. But beneath his calm, steady exterior, I could see the growing tension, the unspoken question that hung between us every time we were together. Is the baby mine? I hadn't given him an answer, because I didn't have one. The uncertainty gnawed at me every waking moment, but I couldn't bring myself to face the reality of it. A part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to unravel the tangled mess I had created. One afternoon, while Alex was away on yet another business trip, Mike showed up at the apartment. He wasn't his usual composed self. His face was taut, his movements stiff, and I could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before I could protest. I sat down on the couch, my heart racing. "About what?" "About the baby. About us. About what the hell is going on here," Mike said, his voice low and strained. He stood in front of me, his hands shoved into his pockets, as if he were trying to keep from reaching out to me. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "Mike? Don't," he interrupted, his voice sharper than I had ever heard it. "Don't brush me off. You're pregnant, Emily, and I need to know where I stand in all of this." The tension in the room was unbearable. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with the weight of everything I hadn't said. "I don't know, Mike. I don't know what to tell you." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "You do know. You just don't want to face it. You don't want to admit that there's a chance this baby is mine because you're scared of what that means." The truth of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. I was scared. Scared of what it would mean for Alex, for Mike, for me. I had spent weeks in denial, hoping that somehow the truth would reveal itself without me having to make the hard decisions. But life didn't work that way. And now, everything was unraveling. "I'm trying to figure things out," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mike sighed, his anger softening, replaced by something deeper. "Hurt." "Emily," I've always been here for you. I've always cared about you, and I'm ready to step up if this baby is mine. But I can't keep living in limbo, not knowing what's going on, not knowing what you want." His words hung in the air, thick with meaning. I knew what he was asking, what he needed from me: clarity, a decision. But how could I give him that when I didn't even know what I wanted myself? "I don't know what I want, Mike," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Everything is such a mess." He moved closer, sitting down next to me on the couch. His hand found mine, his touch warm and reassuring, but there was an edge to it, an unspoken urgency. "Then let me help you figure it out. I'm not asking for a promise. I'm not asking for some grand gesture. I just need to know if you want me here, if you want us." His words broke something inside me. I had spent so long feeling alone, carrying the weight of this pregnancy, the weight of Alex's absence, and now Mike was offering me something real, something solid. But that only made the decision harder. I pulled my hand away, standing up to put some distance between us. "Mike, it's not that simple. I don't even know if this baby is yours or Alex's. How can I make a decision when I don't know the truth?" Mike stood up too, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "You don't need a paternity test to know how you feel, Emily. This isn't just about the baby. It's about us. It's about you and me, and whether you want a life with me or not." I stared at him, my mind spinning. He was right again. This wasn't just about biology. This was about the choices I had made, the paths I had taken, and where I wanted to go from here. But making that choice felt impossible. Every option felt like a betrayal of someone, of Alex, of Mike, of myself. The door to the apartment opened suddenly, and both Mike and I froze as Alex walked in. He looked between us, his face unreadable, though I could see the tension in his jaw. For a moment, the room was filled with a suffocating silence. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his voice calm but cold. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a vice. I could feel the storm brewing, the inevitable clash between the two men who now defined my life. Mike took a step back, his eyes flicking to Alex before turning back to me. "I'll let you handle this," he said quietly, his voice thick with unresolved emotion. Without another word, he walked out, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the room, the space between Alex and me stretching like a chasm. Alex tossed his keys onto the table, his eyes narrowing. "Want to explain what that was about?" I swallowed hard. The words stuck in my throat. There was no more avoiding it, no more hiding from the truth. "I'm pregnant," I said, my voice trembling, "and I don't know if it's yours or Mike's." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex's face hardened, his eyes darkening with something I hadn't seen before: anger, betrayal, maybe even regret. But he didn't explode. He didn't yell or scream. He just stared at me, his expression cold and distant, as if he were looking at a stranger. "I should have seen this coming," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. "I knew things were falling apart between us, but I didn't think you'd—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the calculations he was making, the realization that this wasn't just about the baby. It was about us, about the life we had built, or rather, the life we had failed to build. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, feeling the weight of his disappointment crush me. Alex took a deep breath, his expression softening for the briefest moment. "I'm not sure what there is to say, Emily. You've made your choices, and I've made mine." I wanted to cry, to scream, to beg for some kind of forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, I didn't know if I wanted forgiveness. Maybe what I wanted was freedom. Freedom from the tangled mess of lies and betrayal. Freedom from the life I had been living with Alex. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a strange mix of sadness and resignation. "I'll be around if it turns out the baby is mine, but I think we both know this isn't going to work anymore." And just like that, it was over. Alex turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the apartment, the echo of his words ringing in my ears. The life we had built, the marriage we had fought to hold on to, had crumbled before my eyes. And now, I was left with nothing but the weight of my choices. The next morning, I called Mike. I wasn't sure where things would go from there, but I knew one thing. I couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. The weight of my choices had nearly broken me, but maybe, just maybe, There was still hope for something new to rise from the ashes.